This is the first known photograph of a person, taken in Paris in 1838 by Louis Daguerre. Daguerre-type cameras from the period required a lengthy exposure time, which is why what at the time would have been a busy Parisian street appears empty to us now. The people, horses, and carriages all moved too quickly to be captured. Only this man, who stood still long enough while having his shoes shined, is visible. Photography is one of those inventions that changed everything. Previously, the only way to capture an image was to draw, sculpt, or paint it. And while photographs can be staged or modified in various ways, a painting, by its very nature, is created through choices made by an artist. Which means every image we have of a person before this one was created in a fundamentally subjective way. Art in pre-revolutionary France was dominated by elites, who had the wealth with which they could patronize artists. By the latter half of the 18th century, the Rococo style became popular. Rococo art tended to be highly ornamental and noted for its use of pastel colors. In contrast to earlier styles, it tended to explore largely secular, even frivolous subjects. Its focus was frequently on the pursuit of pleasure, often pleasure of a morally dubious nature. In this 1767 example, The Swing, by Jean-Honore Fragonard, the subject is a young woman being pushed on a swing by her much older husband. The garden depicted is overgrown, creating an idyllic setting, while also hinting at the natural passion between the woman and her lover, who has crossed over a double row of fencing to hide in a bed of roses to watch her secretly. In the foreground, an easily overlooked dog, a traditional symbol of fidelity, barks, as if to warn the clueless husband. To the left, a statue of Cupid holds a finger to his lips, as if to plead with the dog to keep the secret. The painting is full of motion, another hallmark of the Rococo. The woman has just lost one of her little pink shoes. We see it suspended in time above her lover. You have to wonder what will happen next, if the husband goes to pick it up for her. And there's something about the lover's pose that seems too similar to that famous depiction of Adam on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel to be an accident, though they reach toward very different goals. That's the Rococo for you. Fragonard's painting was meant to entertain an aristocratic audience, an audience interested in the pursuit of courtly love and beautiful gardens, and little else. Compare The Swing to Jacques-Louis David's The Oath of the Horatii, painted 17 years later. This work is one of the best-known examples of the neoclassical style. Neoclassical art, an offshoot of the larger Enlightenment intellectual movement, rejected the aristocratic pursuit of pleasure glorified by Rococo art. Instead, it idealized the individual's sense of duty to the larger society, and looked back to the classical period for influence and often subject matter. The Oath of the Horatii depicts a scene from the ancient Roman Republic, when the Horatii brothers pledge themselves to a fight to the death against 3 brothers from Alba, to settle a dispute between the 2 city-states. The brothers stand as a united front, stretching their arms out in a Roman salute toward their father, who holds their swords in his fist at the painting's vanishing point. Female members of the family sit to the right. One of them is a sister of the Horatii, who is also engaged to one of the combatants from Alba. Another is the sister of the brothers from Alba, also the wife of one of the Horatii brothers. Both are about to lose their brothers, their lover, or both. David creates contrast between the men in the painting, who stand tall and straight, and the women, whose bodies are slumped and curved, making them appear physically and emotionally weak. Consistent with the view of many Enlightenment thinkers, who thought only men were capable of exercising the responsibilities of citizenship. The third woman attempts to shield the eyes of one of the Horatii's young sons, but he holds her hand back to watch his father and uncles make their oath. Although David painted the Oath of the Horatii 3 years before the French Revolution, its glorification of patriotic duty over self-interest helped make it one of the Revolution's defining images, greatly increasing his fame. Throughout the Revolution, David created other works of art, including this drawing of the tennis court oath, which depicted a meeting of the National Assembly that took place in a tennis court after Louis XVI locked them out of their usual meeting place. During the meeting, members swore an oath not to separate until they had given France a constitution. David suggests the gravity of the moment by having the members gesture upwards towards a high ceiling. Above them, common people look in on the meeting. A strong wind blows, as if to signal dramatic change originating from the people themselves. David never turned this drawing into large-scale painting as he originally planned. As the revolution progressed, its leadership became increasingly divided. During a particularly violent phase of the revolution, known as the Reign of Terror, many of the men who took the oath came to be considered enemies of the state. Depicting them in a painting would have been a politically dangerous thing to do. By 1799, France was in chaos. Louis XVI, his Queen Marie Antoinette, and the leader of the Reign of Terror, Maximilien Robespierre, had all been executed. France was led by a committee known as the Directory, and was locked in the War of the Second Coalition. In that year, David completed this painting, The Intervention of the Sabine Women, that illustrated another scene from early Roman history. The Sabines' attack on Rome, in retaliation for the Romans' abduction of the Sabine women years earlier. The focus of the painting is Hersilia, the daughter of the king of the Sabines, also one of the kidnapped women. She is now the wife of the king of the Romans, and the mother of his children. The scene painted by David is chaotic. While the men depicted are mostly nude, implying their barbarity, the women are mostly clothed, pointing to their civility. Hersilia, dressed in a white dress that makes her stand out, spreads out her arms to separate her father and husband. One of her children reaches toward her. If we look at the very center of the painting, we see that Hersilia and her husband's shield dominate. On the shield is a she-wolf, suckling the mythical founders of Rome, a symbol of Rome itself, but also of motherhood. The word Roma, on the shield, the only writing in the painting, when viewed through a mirror spells amor, the Latin word for love. It's a painting that calls out to the French people, imploring them to embrace peace and to espouse the supposedly feminine virtues of love and compassion. It's very much in contrast to the themes expressed in the Oath of the Horatii, and a sign of how chaotic the revolution had become. It was during this chaos that a 30-year-old general named Napoleon Bonaparte orchestrated a coup to overthrow the Directory and become first consul of France. Napoleon will probably always be the world's most famous secular portraiture subject. He rose to power when the art form had reached its broadest appeal. In a world before photography and film, newspaper engravings and publicly exhibited works of art were the only forms of visual media with wide distribution. Paintings like the Oath of the Horatii were displayed in public exhibitions that were organized by the royal and later the revolutionary government. This made the visual arts an excellent vehicle for the distribution of propaganda, something Napoleon understood and used to his advantage. Early portraits of Napoleon tended to depict him either as an heroic military leader, such as this 1796 example by one of David's students, Antoine-Jean Gros, or as a hard-working statesman, as in this 1802 painting, also by Gros, and this 1804 example by another David protege, Jean-Auguste-Dominique. Posing with one hand resting inside one's jacket was a technique used prior to Napoleon to make a subject seem calm, relaxed, and in control. But artists used it so frequently with Napoleon that we now associate it almost exclusively with him. One of the most famous portraits of Bonaparte is David's 1801 Napoleon Crossing the Alps. It's essentially a 19th century photo op, commemorating Napoleon's surprise march through the Alps to defeat the Austrians at the Battle of Marengo. It's also exceedingly inaccurate. Napoleon did not lead his army across the Alps. He followed after them days later, and he rode a mule borrowed from a peasant, not the fiery horse he told David to paint him on. This 1850 depiction by Paul Delaroche, a student of Gros, is perhaps more accurate. But it is David's version which has remained more famous, as Napoleon, no doubt, would have preferred. While for this painting David doesn't use the hand inside the jacket trick, he nonetheless shows how calm the first consul is atop that fiery horse. Napoleon gestures towards a summit we cannot see. We must simply follow him. The contours of his arm, his billowing cape, the horse's body, the column of soldiers, and the ground all show us the way. The contrasting orange and blue color scheme seems surprisingly modern. Look for it the next time you watch a movie or TV show. You'll see it soon enough, especially if superheroes are involved. And as if David doesn't want to leave us any doubt what he's trying to say with Napoleon crossing the Alps, he's kind enough to inscribe the names of two other mighty conquerors who made Alpine crossings, Hannibal and Charlemagne, right under Bonaparte's. David's image has been often imitated, merchandised, memified, and subverted by later generations, including in this 2005 interpretation by Kehinde Wiley, who replaced the historical Napoleon with a 21st century African-American man in Timberland boots, fatigues, and a bandana. This type of subversion occurred even during Napoleon's lifetime. Late in 1801, the same year David finished his painting, Napoleon dispatched the largest military force France has ever sent overseas to the colony of Saint-Domingue, modern-day Haiti, to restore French authority there, after a former slave, Toussaint Louverture, promulgated a self-rule constitution for Saint-Domingue, naming himself governor for life. Images of Louverture in that familiar pose soon cropped up, earning him the nickname the Black Napoleon. The real Napoleon, never a proponent of racial equality, hated it. With art, you can make someone look good, or you can make them evil. You can make them stand out, or blend them into the background. You can give them dignity, or dehumanize them. You can call back to earlier examples of greatness. You can create sympathy, and you can make moments seem divine. This is The Oath of the Ancestors, by Guillaume Guyon Lethier, a rival of David's. Lethier was a French citizen born in Guadeloupe in 1760, to a French father and mixed-race mother. The Oath of the Ancestors commemorates the pledge of two men, Alexandre Pétion and Jean-Jacques Dessalines, to support one another in Saint-Domingue's revolt against Napoleonic France. Pétion was a man of mixed race, like Lethier, who was born in Saint-Domingue and sent to France to be educated. He returned to Saint-Domingue as a French army officer, fighting in 1799 against Louverture and his deputy Dessalines in the so-called War of the Knives, and then again in 1801 as part of the force Napoleon sent to restore French authority over the colony. But after Louverture's capture in that conflict, Pétion defected, joining forces with his former enemy Dessalines, who became the rebellion's new leader. Lethier recognized that Pétion and Dessalines' decision to unite was an important symbolic moment in the history of Haiti, whose population was composed mostly of black slaves and people of mixed-race ancestry, like Lethier himself, who were free but still did not enjoy the same rights as whites. In his painting, Lethier depicts the two men on either side of a tablet engraved with the opening words of the Haitian Constitution. A discarded slave collar lies at their feet. Behind them, men and women of different racial backgrounds look up. A woman holds up a child to witness the event. Farther in the background, the fight for independence still rages. Modern scholars have made much of the fact that God is depicted in a very conventional, Eurocentric way. Some of this may be because Lethier, who is three-quarters white, was unable or unwilling to depict God in any other way. But part of it too may be an intentional reference to familiar Old Testament imagery, reinforced by the tablet and the Hebrew writing, a reference that brings to mind God's freeing of the enslaved Israelites. By the end of 1803, the remaining French forces evacuated Saint-Domingue. On New Year's Day, 1804, Desailly officially declared the former colony to be an independent country, henceforth to be known by its indigenous name, Haiti. In September, he was proclaimed emperor of the new nation. On December 2nd, 1804, Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of the French. The artifice of Napoleon as the humble soldier and civil servant could now be stripped away and replaced with a grandeur fit not just for a king of France, but for the emperor of much of Europe. We see that grandeur in this painting, Napoleon on his imperial throne, by Ingres. It's possible Ingres may have drawn inspiration from this earlier depiction of God the Father by Jan van Eyck, part of the Ghent altarpiece. Napoleon's army captured the altarpiece's central panels and brought them to the Louvre, where Ingres would have had access to them. Note the similarities between the shape of the two thrones. Ingres filled his painting with important symbols of Napoleon's power, many of them specifically referencing Imperial Rome, including the golden laurel wreath Bonaparte wears for a crown, also a symbol of victory. His robes are imperial purple. Eagles, an important Imperial Roman symbol, appear on his necklace, the throne's armrests, and the rug. The scepter in Napoleon's right hand is Charlemagne's, creating a connection to him, just as David had done in Napoleon crossing the Alps. The symbolic hand of justice, supported by Napoleon's left hand, points to a crest representing Italy and the Papal States, creating another connection between Bonaparte and the old Roman Republic. The painting can be read from left to right, beginning with Charlemagne and ending with the current King of Italy, just one of Napoleon's many titles. In Napoleon on his imperial throne, Ingres painted the emperor almost as a divine ruler, something that becomes even more clear if we compare it to one of his later works, Jupiter and Thetis. To commemorate his actual coronation, Napoleon selected Ingres' teacher, the reliable David. The result was the consecration of the Emperor Napoleon and the coronation of Empress Josephine. It's a huge painting, more than 32 feet wide. David originally planned to depict the actual moment Napoleon placed the imperial crown on his own head, but Bonaparte thought this would make him seem arrogant. So he told David to instead paint the moment Napoleon crowned his wife, Josephine, empress. It's the only modest thing about this painting. David, who attended the actual ceremony and can be seen sketching here, shrunk the dimensions of Notre Dame Cathedral to avoid making Napoleon seem too small. David took other liberties as well. He painted people who were not actually at the ceremony, including Bonaparte's mother, who refused to attend. Some have suggested this anonymous priest is actually a depiction of Julius Caesar. 3 days after his coronation, Napoleon held a ceremony where he distributed eagle standards to his regiments, reviving the custom of Roman emperors distributing eagle standards to their legions. David captured the moment with his 1810 painting, Oath of the Army, made to the Emperor after the distribution of the Eagles at the Field of Mars, or the distribution of the Eagles, for short. It's remarkable how frequently neoclassical art from this period revisits the subject matter of individuals making an oath to the collective state. One can see clear examples between the distribution of the Eagles and David's earlier work, the Oath of the Horatii. The Roman salute is repeated. David arranges the participants' extended arms, the standards, and even the soldiers' bodies to form a triangle, directing our gaze upwards, similar to what he did with the tennis court oath, to again suggest the gravity of the moment. David originally planned to depict the Roman goddess of victory flying above the standards, as shown in this early sketch, but Napoleon rejected this idea in favor of a more realistic portrayal. In the painting, David places the new emperor at the top of the stairs, bathing him in light, while everyone around him remains in shadow. Notice that Napoleon himself does not salute upwards towards a higher authority, but rather straight ahead toward the standards, indicating that he is on a different plane from everyone else in the painting. After crowning himself emperor, Napoleon went on to enjoy a series of military victories during the wars of the Third and Fourth Coalitions, culminating in a victory over the Russians at the Battle of Friedland. After Friedland, Tsar Alexander I of Russia agreed to treaties near Tilsit that essentially caused Napoleon to become the master of most of Western Europe. But in this victory were the seeds of Bonaparte's downfall. Napoleon insisted on maintaining his continental system, which forbid continental Europe from trading with Great Britain, which Napoleon hoped would weaken his old enemy. But in his quest to maintain his blockade, Napoleon weakened his own economy, and precipitated two new conflicts that would bring about his downfall: the Peninsular War and the invasion of Russia in 1812. This is the 3rd of May, 1808, by the Spanish painter Francisco Goya. There's something different about this painting compared with the others we've discussed so far. It's intentionally not attractive to look at, and it doesn't glorify its subject matter, the execution of Spanish civilians by French soldiers during the Peninsular War. The 3rd of May is neither Rococo nor a neoclassical artwork. Rather, it is an early example of Romanticism, an art style that became dominant during the first half of the 19th century. Whereas neoclassical art glorified classical and Enlightenment thinking, celebrating the collective society and the concept of progress, Romantic art challenged these ideals, valuing instead the individual, emotion, and calling into question Enlightenment thinkers' faith in order and progress. One can view the composition of Goya's painting as the reverse of David's Oath of the Horatii. This may have been an intentional choice. Both pictures feature rows of immovable soldiers, pointing towards a man with his arms raised. Opposite the soldiers are clusters of people in a lower position, acting emotionally, but the similarities end there. David means to glorify his soldiers, but Goya's are faceless, blending together in their grays and blacks, more machine than men. Their bayonet-tipped guns point not to a father figure meant to signify authority, but to a man they will shoot in cold blood. Goya makes clear parallels between this victim and Christ. His arms are stretched out as if he is being crucified. His white and yellow clothing matches the colors of the papal coat of arms. Goya even places shadows in the man's palms, meant to look like stigmata. Goya's painting can be read chronologically from right to left, with those waiting to be executed on the right, those a trigger pull away from death farther to the left, and those who are already lost on the far left. Whereas David wants us to look down on the figures opposite his soldiers, Goya means for us to sympathize with his, and it's hard not to. It's important to remember that between 3 and 7 million people died during the Napoleonic Wars. In the face of so much carnage, artists like Goya pushed back against the idea that war should be shown as something uniformly glorious, and either impersonal or focused only on great men. Goya wanted to show us that war is terrible, particularly for common people. Other artists used Napoleon's disastrous invasion of Russia as an opportunity to showcase the tragedy of war, with works of art in the new Romantic style. Among them was the German Adolf Northern. In Napoleon's retreat from Moscow, Northern shows Napoleon and his weary troops retreating from Russia. 3 soldiers, frozen to death, lie at Napoleon's feet. In Western culture, where we read from left to right, we naturally view left-to-right motion as the natural direction of progress. In Northern's painting, Napoleon and his men travel in the opposite direction, from right to left. Not progress, but a regression. Goya does the same in The 3rd of May, the chronological progression of victims, from waiting to be executed, to execution, to death, is also a right-to-left chain of events. But let's end on a high point. This is the Chelsea pensioners reading the Waterloo Dispatch, by the Scottish painter Sir David Wilkie. Commissioned by the Duke of Wellington, and completed in 1822, the picture shows a public reading of the news of Napoleon's final defeat at the Battle of Waterloo. It's worth noting what this painting is not. It is not solemn, and it is not focused on so-called great men, as a neoclassical work of art would be. Rather, it is a romantic work of art, focused on everyday people, meant to produce an emotional response. Not sorrow as in the 3rd of May, but joy. The crowd Wilkie depicts is diverse. Near the center of the painting is an older man, reading out the news to the crowd. He is a veteran of the 7 Years' War, chosen by Wilkie perhaps to call back to an earlier British victory over France. The crowd also includes a black man, women, and babies. Everyone participates in the good news. Even the dogs seem overcome with excitement. The one exception is the woman with the crying baby and a look of apprehension on her face, reading the newspaper over the veteran's shoulder, trying to obtain news of her husband who fought at Waterloo, unsure if he is alive or dead. This focus on emotion is also very much consistent with a romantic work of art. When we look at a work of art, whether it's centuries old or brand new, we might ask ourselves whether the artist is pushing society in a certain direction or being pulled by it. And I think the answer is almost always both. A Rococo painting like The Swing reflects the place and time when Fragonard created it, a time when a wealthy elite exerted outsized influence over the art world and celebrated an increasingly secular worldview centered around the pursuit of pleasure. But The Swing also reflects active choices made by Fragonard. Choices that make us sympathize with the girl in a swing and her lover, more so than with her husband and his dog. Choices that ever so slowly push society towards greater acceptance of Rococo values. It's the same with neoclassical and romantic works of art, products of their own environments, but also antecedents of further change. Art is, after all, a conversation that includes artists and their audiences, and is informed by other artistic works. Art is shaped by, and itself shapes, society. And art lasts longer than we think it does. Rococo, neoclassical, and romantic works of art were in conversation with one another 200 years ago, and are still in conversation with one another and with new styles today. The same questions of individualism versus collectivism, of emotion versus duty, remain relevant. The visual language of these art forms, itself informed by an ancient vocabulary, is still spoken today, and will still be spoken tomorrow. Thanks for watching.